Comfort zones. We hear that a lot, especially for kids. Parents tell them all the time, you need to get out of your comfort zone because it's going to help you be a better person. But sometimes as adults, we don't take that same advice.
So that's why this week we are taking it from both angles: how to encourage your kids to get out of their comfort zone, but also you as a parent, as an adult, how do you step outside of your box of security? We're talking all about that on this week's episode of the Hopecast.
Okay, welcome in, Hope Dealers. We are glad that you are joining us again. It's Steve and Bethany's Hopecast. Hope you're having a wonderful week. I know where we are in the southern United States, it's miserable hot. I mean, it is just brutal.
We're melting.
And you being preggers over there, I mean, how hard is this versus what you've had like last summer? I guess last summer wasn't as brutal as it's been, but now adding another person, it's got to be tough, right?
You know, I didn't think it was possible to hate summer more. And then I got pregnant and then I was like, oh, wait, it is possible. Never mind. Yeah. So it's not a fun time. I'm not going to lie. I had to do some errands yesterday. And so I was walking into the grocery store and of course, couldn't find a parking space, had to park in the back 40, you know how it goes. Mm-hmm. And I'm walking into the store and this is such a first world problem. Like I shouldn't complain, but just give me a minute. And I'm walking into the store and I'm like, this is the worst. This is the worst. I can feel my flesh melting off of my body as we speak. The baby's miserable. I'm sure I'm miserable. It's just, pregnancy and super hot Southern weather is not a great time, but I'm making it through and I'm glad that I live in a day and age where there's air conditioning. That's all.
Absolutely. I can say. Oh, for real. Yeah. Because right now, I mean, when we say it's hot, if you are experienced, I think, really though, I was going to say it's, if you're in the Southern United States, you know what we're talking about, but I think it's really everywhere this summer. Yeah. Even in the as far north as like Louisville and Cincinnati, I've heard people complain about heat index values being up at over 100.
And they are not even used to it. Like at least in the South, we can prepare ourselves emotionally and physically. The poor people up north, they can't handle it. They're not used to it.
I know. Like today, I think the actual air temperature before humidity is added in is going to be 103. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Stupid. Then you add in the heat index and it's like 115 and everybody's just like, stay inside. This is hibernation weather.
Yeah. And you hear the best analogy is it's like a big, heavy, wet dog breathing on you. That's what it's like. That's what it's like. So with that great analogy in your mind, we're ready to talk about comfort zones and how to maybe jump out of the comfort zone, because, and I wanted to bring this up today because it was kind of a real life example with our family. My 8-year-old made a decision to follow Christ. He made a profession of faith. Yeah, it was so good at our vacation Bible school that we had at our church, which, by the way, I can't encourage you enough to send your kids to Bible school. It's just really, really good. And it was a Wednesday night. And so he made a decision. The pastor asked if anybody wanted to find out more. If you want to give your life to Christ, raise your hand and then come forward and then go talk to a counselor. So he did, and everything was good with that. And then at the next couple of days, I told him, I said, okay, what we're going to do now is we'll just go in front of the church and just kind of celebrate and let the church know what your decision is made. And it's kind of the tradition we have in the Baptist church. I'm sure there's a lot of other churches do the same thing. And so he was all nervous and he didn't want to do it. He's like, Dad, I never have wanted to do that. I didn't know.
Are you talking about like him getting baptized or
no, just the actual part of going up in front of the church and just like saying, hey, I've made a profession of faith.
Oh, okay. Christ. Yeah.
He didn't want to do that. He was nervous to stand in front of all those people. He was afraid he was going to have to speak and say something or whatever. And I said, no. And my wife had a great little analogy for it. She said, you always want people to come to your birthday party, right? You want people to celebrate your birthday. Well, this is your second birth. So we want to just celebrate. Well, he still wasn't having much of it. So it came time. We said Sunday night, we're going to go forward when the pastor gives a chance for anybody to come forward. And so finally, I know it was probably the longest hour of his life, waiting. And so I kind of looked at him and I said, let's go. And he didn't want to. He kind of shook his head. And I said, no, I said, we need to do this because it's only going to get harder the more you put it off. And let's just go ahead and let's do it. Let's get it over with. And he did. And we finally, went back and everything was fine. No other, big story to tell about it. But I just thought, part of me and my wife was kind of this way too. You don't want to force him to do something. He's not comfortable doing it. So you don't want to force him. But the other part of me was, hey, he needs to do this. And he needs to make this profession public, because Jesus called us all to make public professions. So he's got to step out, because it is scary. It is kind of nerve-wracking, and it is hard, especially for a little guy that's 8 years old, to go up in front of a bunch of adults. Even though he goes to church with them every week, he doesn't really know them, But I just thought, and maybe, I don't know, maybe he'll wind up in therapy before too much longer. But I thought giving him that push was the right thing to do at that time. And I think sometimes we have to do that as parents, to push kids out, to be able to get them to grow a little bit.
Well, I think it's a fine line to walk for sure. I'll just speak from my personal experience. I was a really shy kid growing up, which is, it's weird. I feel like I had like two sides to my personality. On one hand, I didn't necessarily mind being in front of people. I, as a little kid, was in church play, the church Christmas play and things like that. And didn't mind being a part of things like that. But on the other hand, I was really a shy kid, where I felt like if I didn't know anybody, or if there was the chance that, like what you're talking about, if I was going to have to speak, or if there was any realm of possibility in my mind that I might look stupid or look silly, or just be in a situation where I didn't really like know how things were going to go, I would get really, really anxious and wouldn't want to do it. And honestly, I mean, that was pretty prevalent in my life, all from the time that I was really little up until like even in high school. There were things that my parents kind of had to push me pretty hard to do, of like, we're not going to force you, but also like, you're doing this, you need to do this. And I think that that's a fine line to walk, because you're right. You don't want to force your kids to do something, especially from, a spiritual side of things, talking, in that, on that topic, I guess. You don't want to force your kids to do things. You want it to be genuine, but at the same time, spiritual things can be really scary, and stepping out, especially in regards to our faith or something involving church, that can be even more intimidating than, say, like an extracurricular activity after school or something like that. There's like a level of intimidation that I think kids feel. And so it's hard. You don't want to force anything on your kids, but at the same time, maybe they do need that additional push and that additional encouragement of like, we promise this will be great for you in the long run. And in the long run, you're going to enjoy that you did this and be thankful that you did this, but you just need that push.
And let me just circle back and just say, just to make sure I'm very clear, the whole coming forward, wanting to follow Jesus is something we have not pushed as a family, me and my wife, and even his older siblings, just because we prayed for him and we would bring him to God, but we didn't want to do what you're saying, push him, because we're the church family and we want to make sure he joins us as, people on a church roll or whatever.
You can't save your own kids. You can't do that.
Exactly. So we kind of took a real hands-off approach with him on that. What I would like to say, I just want to be clear. I was talking about the actual just coming forward to make the profession known, because he was all in. He told the guy he was counseling with, he said, "Oh yeah, I know exactly that Jesus lives in my heart, and I know that I'm saved now, and everything's great." So it wasn't that. So I just wanted to go back and underline that really quick, but no, I think you're right. I think it is sometimes a moving target sometimes, and you have to know your kid and their personality. But I think the tendency is we want to protect as parents. We want to not put our baby out in vulnerable positions, and even though it may not seem like a big deal to us, it can be a big deal to them. So yeah, there is that fine line, but I think, as you're saying with spiritual stuff, I do think you need to not let your child kind of run things and be the boss, because I can remember back with my older two kids, one of them especially, when got time to go from going out on, the kind of quote unquote children stuff into the youth, didn't want to do it. It's a whole different ball game, a lot of older kids in there, and didn't know very many people, a whole list of reasons why. But we continued to push. We said, no, you're going to do this, because we felt like at the end of the road that she would, I've already given away who it is, but she would, it would be good for her. And so, when we did that, we wanted to make sure that, yes, she did put up defenses, and yes, she was like, I just don't want to go. But we kind of forced her. We kind of pushed her, because we felt like that was the best thing to do, because she would not ever grow spiritually without being involved in that group, because that's her peers. And she wouldn't ever and she would miss out on everything else that's going on that's good there. Because I think the main job is to try to impress upon your kids to take their eyes off of themselves. Now, that's very hard for kids of any age, but to see the bigger picture, to say, okay, look, the youth group going out there and transitioning from children's building to youth, it is tough and it is hard, but it really is not about you. It's about still worshiping God and about developing your relationship and having him work in and through you. That's a hard lesson to teach, but really, I think as parents, we have to stick to our guns on that, because our human nature is to pull back and say, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to do it. So I'm going to just let it slide. And I'm just going to sit back here and keep doing what I want to do all the time. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because as harsh as this might sound, when it comes to spiritual things, our emotions need to be second to what God is calling us to do. And I think oftentimes, or dare I say all the time, the things that God calls us to are pretty much always uncomfortable, or at least make us a little bit like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. But I mean, that's where we're called to step out in faith, no matter what the situation is. Maybe it's going on a mission trip, or maybe it's moving to the youth group, or even seeking out a church, for the first time, if you haven't been raised in church, or joining a small group. Like, there's a lot of different situations that we find ourselves in, whether it's kids or adults alike. But I think, we can kind of get caught up in that me, how am I feeling about things? And emotions are important and they're valid. And I think especially with kids, it's important to understand how they're feeling and where they're coming from. But at the same time, if it's something like, going to a church where you don't know anybody, or joining a Bible study, or joining a youth group, at that point, it's kind of like, I get where you're coming from, and I understand that. And I understand that it's scary and it's hard when you don't know anybody and you don't know who you're going to sit with. There's valid fears and valid concerns there, things that I've dealt with. I mean, I can remember being a scared 7th grader thinking, who am I going to sit with? Because that matters. Like, it does.
Sure. And it matters as adults too.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody likes feeling like the new kid, or nobody likes feeling like unsure of where to go. And there's some valid feelings there. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm completely discounting that. However, if this is something that will benefit us spiritually, if it's something that we know God is calling us to do, that's where I think you just have to say, Lord, give me courage, give me strength, give me bravery that I need to go into this situation. Because when we are ruled by our emotions in that moment, I think oftentimes it spills into other areas where we maybe don't want to be upfront with someone about, something that we're thinking, or we don't want to go into a new job environment and sit with a new coworker, or even kind of smaller steps that we could take that reflect Christ. we don't want to do those things when we start being ruled by our emotions rather than what God is calling us to do. And so I think to me, it's convicting, and I'm not even a kid, but I think as adults and as kids, like, we all struggle with this. This is all something that we deal with. Our comfort zone is called the comfort zone for a reason. And so it's a place where we feel secure, but it can also be a place that cripples us when God is calling us to do something and we don't step out.
I agree totally, because that's how our faith grows. When you're able to step out and do something that's totally out of that box, and it makes you fully or more fully reliant on him to come through for you. Now you realize, oh, okay, he can be trusted with this. So the next time that it comes up, it's a little bit easier. And the next time is a little bit easier than that. That's the whole goal and the whole purpose. But again, I do go back to the whole thing saying that we have to see the bigger picture and have to realize that it is, like what you were saying, is all about how God wants to use me and is calling me through this. Because look, the youth group ultimately in my daughter's situation is about God. You know, the church that we go to is ultimately not about us, but about him and us worshiping him. So when we're starting to talk about those things, I think that's got to be our attitude, our mindset is, God, this is, and look, and like you were talking about the emotions, you can't discount them. But again, I say a lot, is take those emotions to him. God, I'm scared of this. This doesn't, float my boat at all. This is hard. This is definitely something that I would not choose to do 10 times out of 10, but I feel like you're leading me. So I'm stepping out of faith. I need you to carry me, and he loves that.
Yeah. Well, and honestly too, when we, get so focused on ourselves and we forget that going to church is ultimately for God, reading our Bible is ultimately for God, that's the purpose. It turns into, I think, idolatry, where we're placing our own emotions and our own feelings above God and above what he's called us to. We've been called to worship him, to praise him, to spend time with him. And so even in those situations where it is really scary and where, again, we have those valid human emotions of insecurity or just shyness, I think we all can deal with that. Those are valid emotions, but we just need to make sure that they're in their proper place. And as you said, we need to take them to the Lord. That's the only place that we'll find comfort and find true security. It's not in our comfort zone, it's in Christ.
It really is. Although a lot of times that comfort zone can whisper to us, this is the safest place to be, not following where Jesus has called, because that's kind of scary. Right here where I am stepping back. So we've got about 5 minutes left before we wrap this one up. So let's give a little hope. What can we do? A couple of practical things to make sure that we take those initiatives with not only our kids, but with ourselves to get out of that comfort and kind of step out of the boat like Peter did in that New Testament story.
I think it starts with a conversation and starts with a whole lot of honesty, maybe sitting down with your kids and just getting where they're coming from, hearing them out, hearing their feelings, hearing their thoughts, and letting them know that you hear them and that you understand, and sitting with them and saying, listen, I get it. I was the new kid once too. I understand where you're coming from. I know how that feels. But then just reminding them, one, that God is always with them. We're not in this life alone. He's always with us, and we can have security in that. But then also just reminding them that ultimately the things that God calls us to are for our good. And so even though it's scary and even though it can be intimidating, the things that God calls us to are for a purpose and for a reason. And so that will just be an opportunity for us to rely on him more fully. And for any adults listening, I would just encourage you, if there's something that you're kind of wrestling with, okay, should I do this? Should I not? Think about the example that you could set for your kids if you do something that scares you. I think that's huge. Like, kids always think that adults are just indestructible and aren't scared of anything. But when you maybe purposely take a step outside of your comfort zone and do something that scares you, I think not only does that give you a chance to grow your own faith personally, but it also just shows to your kids like, hey, mom can be scared of something and still do it. that's a life skill that I think will benefit them in the long run. And then, of course, the spiritual example there too.
I think that's tremendously well said. I hope that this has been an encouragement to you today. Thank you so much for listening, because we do want to help you continue to grow in your faith and take these lessons that you know that you want to do and have them be real in your life and really live for Christ. That's what the Stephen Bethany Hopecast is all about. We'd love for you to tell your friends and to just say, hey, if you know somebody that's in the podcast, let them know about ours. Just word of mouth would be tremendous for us, and just the growth and the popularity of this podcast. Just let people know. We would really appreciate that a lot. So Bethany, we're going to wrap this one up. I know that it's not always easy, but it is something that we just got to look to Jesus to, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We are so thankful for you listening and for just including us in your day as you listen to this podcast. Check us out on social media. If you haven't already, give us a follow there. We have the links down in the show notes. You can also check out our YouTube channel and just connect with us in that way. We would love to hear from you if this podcast did encourage you, or honestly too, just for future episodes. If you have anything that you want us to cover topic wise, we would love to hear from you. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Yeah. And for all things Stephen Bethany, hit us up on our website, stephenbethany.com. That's enough for 1 week. We'll be back next week with a fresh episode of Stephen Bethany's Hopecast. Hope you have a tremendous rest of the week. Good night, Olive Branch.
Bye, y'all.